Hello and welcome back to the CCSE Research Conference, Democracy and Media. Up next is our undergraduate research competition session with our undergraduate research competition winners. I'm Andrea Langrish, Managing Director at the Center for C-SPAN Scholarship and Engagement, and I will be your moderator for this session. The undergraduate research competition showcases research in the field of communication at the undergraduate level using the C-SPAN archives. Students select a clearly stated and defined communication concept, theory, or idea, and prepare a 5-minute presentation using the C-SPAN video library. Students create or find video clips that demonstrate the communication concept at work and include these in their presentation. Our first winner to present is Anya Welborn. She is a graduate student at George Washington University seeking a Master of Arts in Security Policy Studies. She graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Communication and Political Science with highest distinction in May 2021 from Purdue University and was named the Outstanding Senior in Communication. As an undergraduate, she was a member of the Communication Learning Community and the Center for C-SPAN Scholarship and Engagement student community. Among some of her other accomplishments, Anya has had her poetry published by Purdue's Literary Journal and has delivered a TED Ed Talk. Welcome, Anya.
Hello. All right, so Andrea introduced me, but I am Anya Welborn. I'm a graduate student at George Washington University studying security policy studies. I graduated from Purdue in the spring with a degree in political science and communication, and today I will be giving the presentation I gave at the undergraduate research competition last spring on framing and Trump's second impeachment trial. So I'll begin this presentation by discussing framing as a concept, before then explaining the value of using the impeachment trial as an example of framing. I will do this by showing examples of framing of the trial in media, as well as showing C-SPAN video of the use of framing during the trial itself. And then finally, I will explain the importance of understanding framing. But first, what is framing? Framing is a communication concept that involves stressing or focusing on certain aspects of a story, an issue, or reality in order to provide or suggest at a chosen meaning to influence an audience's perception of an issue. And this can sound complicated, but it can be pretty easily explained by these two frozen yogurt cups. The contents or the reality of the cartons are identical. They both contain the exact same amount of fat. However, the carton on the right is trying to frame its contents as being healthier by focusing on what isn't in the carton. Simply put, by stating that it is 80% fat-free, it's framing its contents differently than the carton containing 20% fat. Now that we understand what framing is, why is the Trump impeachment trial such a good example of framing at work? Well, first, it was a well-covered issue by all media outlets, meaning it'll be easy to identify the use of different frames between different media outlets. And second, because the court proceedings were televised, we can analyze the C-SPAN video for framing used on either side of the trial. First, we'll consider the use of framing in media. Liberal and conservative news media have very different goals when reporting on political news, meaning news outlets will frame information differently in order to influence their audience's perception of events. This is evident in two different news articles posted mere days apart by MSNBC and Fox News during the trial. The more liberal news media, MSNBC, wanted to frame the trial in terms of a weak defense and a strong prosecution. And they did this by using quotes such as, "The impeachment trial proves Trump's guilt," or "The defense of the former president lay in ruins." Contrastingly, Fox News wanted to present the information in forms of a strong defense. And they did this by quoting prominent Republicans as having said, "There's no chance of the president actually being convicted," and that the final outcome of the impeachment trial is clear. Similarly to media, the prosecution and defense had very different goals during the trial, leading to the use of different frames. Consider first an argument presented by the prosecution.
Soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
In a speech spanning almost 11,000 words, yes, we did check, that was the one time, the only time President Trump used the word peaceful or any suggestion of nonviolence. The implication of the president's tweets, the rally, and the speeches were clear. President Trump used the word fight or fighting 20 times, including telling the crowd they needed to fight like hell to save our democracy. We know how the crowd responded to Donald Trump's words.
Now consider a piece of evidence shown by the defense.
We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down to the Capitol. But I think right here, we're going to walk down to the Capitol. And we're going to cheer on our brave senators and
because the prosecution and defense had very different goals for the trial in order to influence an audience's perception, although they both used video from the exact same speech, how they framed the video to support their arguments was very different. The prosecution wanted to frame the evidence as being incriminating, and they did this by making Trump's violent rhetoric during the speech more salient than his peaceful rhetoric, by indicating just how often violent rhetoric was used and minimizing those instances of peaceful rhetoric during the speech. The defense, on the other hand, wanted to discount the prosecution, and they did this by framing the prosecution's evidence as being manipulative, by showing the prosecution's video next to the full unedited speech and labeling the video as having been manipulated. Through examples in media and during the trial, how framing aims to influence an audience's perception of an issue is clear. And this is important, because although frames can be useful in directing thought, they can also cut off from greater understanding of an issue. However, if you're able to understand how framing works, you can more easily identify the frame and start to see the bigger picture more objectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya. We're going to do questions here for Anya. My first question is, Anya, what inspired you to pick the impeachment trial as your example for the framing?
Actually, so when I was an intern with the CCSE, every week we would have weekly meetings where we would just talk about what was going on in politics at the time. And I remember the week of the impeachment trial, I was kind of assigned to look at how the media was presenting the impeachment trial as it was going on. And I remember just looking through my news feed of headlines for that day, and I saw two right up against each other that were saying the exact opposite things. It was talking about, a source close to the president says, and then one of them was saying President Trump feels like his defense is doing terribly, and the other one was saying President Trump thinks that the defense is doing great. And I think that was one of the clearest instances I'd ever seen of just framing at work in the media. And I thought, this is pretty interesting. So when it came to pick a topic for the undergraduate research competition, that was the first thing I thought of, was just those two headlines butted up against each other.
Fantastic. All right. And does anybody have any questions?
Hi, Anya. I have a question. I was just wondering if when you were preparing for the presentation, if you preferred to go over a script multiple times and really try to get it in your head, or if you went more point by point and tried to develop it from there.
That's a great question. So whenever I make a presentation, I like to start with the points themselves. So I'll make kind of a bullet pointed step-by-step of what I want to go over. I did sort of the same thing when writing an essay or basically any sort of argumentative paper. And then I kind of go through and how do these points tie together? How can I get from point A to point B? And that's where sort of more script comes in, but you never really want to stick to a script exactly, because then you kind of get stuck when you forget something.
Okay, we have a question from Dr. Guitar.
Hi, yeah, thank you. And again, nice project, fascinating project. I have one very brief humorous question, is that having done some Trump projects myself, how exhausted are you now? I don't think I'll ever do another one.
Yeah, it was definitely a an experience to say the least. I think going through the C-SPAN video just of the trial itself and really having to like watch every single minute of it to kind of find out what the most salient points would be was just, it was a lot during the experience.
Yeah, I've been there. My more substantive question, and I haven't read the paper, so I'm sorry if you've defined this, but when you talk about juxtaposing conservative and liberal media, I mean, it sounds like you're using the popularized terms to describe that. How do you do anything to contest that potential designation? Only because there are enough critical scholars who argue that anything that's a profit center is effectively conservative. But in more popular terms, we've got Democrat equating liberal and Republican equating conservative. So how do you parse that out in the paper to designate between the two?
I was pretty much using just basic popular terms, popular understanding of media, and pretty much who they were quoting in the articles, who they were, leaning towards. So obviously Fox News was quoting a lot of Republicans in that article, which is why I considered it more conservative media in that moment, whether or not it would always be, kind of presented in that way.
Well, thank you, Anya. Our next winner to present is Garon Young. Garon is a sophomore currently studying mechanical engineering at Purdue University. He's the son of two Purdue alums, Jason and Garon Young, and is originally from South Bend in Northern Indiana. Garon attended St. Joseph High School, where he was president of the National Honor Society and a member of the Spanish Honor Society, a St. Joe scholar, honor roll student, peer mentor, and played lacrosse and tennis. At Purdue, he has been into weightlifting and has joined the Alpha Tau Omega fraternity. And next year, he plans to be a BGR leader and get more involved with his fraternity. Welcome, Garon.
Hello, hello. Get this ready for you guys. Okay. Can everybody see that? Does that work?
Yes.
All right, great. Yep. So thank you for the introduction. So today I'm going to be talking to you guys about identification and then showing you guys some real world examples that I took from the C-SPAN archives. So let's get into it. All right. So what is identification? It's a very popular rhetoric that uses interest in ways to achieve consubstantiality with the audience, right? So an example of interests would be like a political speaker talking to college students, mentioning lowering the cost of college because that's of interest to college students. And then an example of ways would be like a speaker wearing Purdue clothes to speak to Purdue students because, we both do those sort of things. That's what's important to us. And so the main goal of identification is consubstantiality, which is basically where the speaker's perspective is shared, or the audience shares the speaker's perspective on something. And the primary theorist of identification was Kenneth Burke. So there are four main identification appeals. The first one being associational, which is like common ground. So an example of this would be like, I like Justin Bieber, you like Justin Bieber, let's be friends. And then dissociation is kind of like the inverse of this in a way, wherein you would be like, I hate Justin Bieber, you hate Justin Bieber, let's be friends. So it's almost like you both are distancing yourself from something, and that is kind of what you guys bond over. And then we transcendence is where you strive to group the speaker and the audience together. An example would be my fellow Americans, we the people, us, those sorts of words. And then finally, we have unifying symbols, which would be things that convey shared ideas. And a very popular example of that would be the American flag. So for this first clip, some context, David Duke is talked about in the clip, and he was the former Grand Wizard of the KKK. And in the clip, the students are being interviewed about him running for a political position.
Say that doesn't mean it's true.
Well, what, then you're saying he is a racist?
I think so.
Yeah, it's such a rash opinion to be such a racist like that and then just change. I think it's very hard for me to believe that he did change and is a reborn Christian.
I would say it would focus on his credibility in that range, and that's gonna hurt him, because I mean, personally, I think he's a racist. Just because of his past and his credibility, you really can't trust him.
Say that, but that doesn't mean.
Okay, so in the clip, you hear the students call David Duke racist several times. So what they do is they establish what they dislike about him, and they all have this in common. Later on, they say that you can't really trust him, which asserts that racists are untrustworthy, and they call his opinions rash, which asserts that racism is a foolish view to have, and racists have foolish views. So what they do is they create this united front, and by labeling him as a racist and associating unsavory characteristics to him, they give the impression that people who dislike untrustworthy and foolish people shouldn't endorse David Duke and should instead join them in opposition of David Duke. So for this next clip, this is a State of the Union address that JFK is delivering in 1963, and this is during the Cold War.
Nor is their faith flagged. If at times our actions seem to make life difficult for others, it is only because history has made life difficult for us all. But difficult days need not be dark. I think these are proud and memorable days in the cause of peace and freedom. We are proud, for example, of Major Rudolph Anderson, who gave his life over the island of Cuba.
So in this clip, you hear a lot of words used like we, our, and us. And what these do is it assumes the speaker and the audience are together, they're on the same page, and that their experiences are collectively shared. You later hear him say, if at times our actions and blah, 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 difficult for us all, our and us. This makes it appear that such a life has been tough for all Americans, right? Some have it easier than others, obviously, but when everybody struggles, it feels good that you're not alone, which makes the Cold War seem less bad since you're not alone in your struggle. And this makes you more willing to tolerate the Cold War, since it's easier knowing that you're not alone in your plight. You later on hear him say, we are proud of Major Anderson. And this makes it seem that the entirety of the US is supportive of the Civil War and service. So this we transcendence kind of serves to promote feelings of patriotism and unity through these rough times of the Cold War. And that's it. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
Thank you, Garon. Actually, I wanted to find out, in what way have you found that the transcendence and dissociation actually have some similarities? And in what ways have you found them to be in differences?
So they are similar in that the ultimate goal of both of those tactics is to try and create some sort of bond between speaker and audience. I have found that with we transcendence, though, it typically only works when you're speaking to a large group of people. It wouldn't necessarily work if there was less individuals, because when there's less people, you can kind of sort of figure out who's different and who's not, versus when there's a large group of people, you can kind of make these broad assumptions and everybody else who is a part of the audience would have to take you at your word for it. Versus dissociational works really well on the individual level versus the group level, because you can very easily figure out what one person dislikes and you can join them with that in disliking that certain thing. But yeah, no, mostly just like the groups of people, and also when you would use them too. Like, we transcendence typically works well with, like you see it popularly used in political speeches, State of the Union addresses. Typically people who are public speaking will use that, versus dissociation could be used conversationally or even in a large group setting.
Okay. Dr. Browning, you have a question?
Yes, how did you decide to use these two examples?
Okay, so my thought process for that was pretty straightforward. I am an engineer, so I like to get right to it. I thought to myself, what is one thing that everybody dislikes? And of course, the first thing that popped into my mind is, of course, racism, most especially the KKK. And I knew that C-SPAN had gone back a ways, and that during that time, we did have a lot of racism, unfortunately, rampant, and that it would have been recorded. So I searched for clips of those sorts of things. I just typed in racist and I saw David Duke pop up, and I remember hearing about him a lot in high school. So I clicked on that clip and I found that one. And then when it came to the we transcendence, I know that I hear those sorts of things, as I mentioned earlier. Typically, presidents use that a lot. I always hear that in the State of the Union addresses. So I just searched State of the Union and I found one of JFK, and I happen to like JFK, so I choose that clip. So,
And if I could follow up, where did you learn about this concept?
Dr. I don't know if Professor Boyd was here earlier or not, but so I was in his Comp 204 class my freshman year. And so one unit that we spent a lot on was rhetoric, because, rhetoric is obviously a huge thing in communication in general. And so I remember learning about this in class, and I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know this was a thing. Like, this seems so common. You see it all the time. I didn't know there was a label for it. And so since, that really appealed to me, because I didn't know that it was a actually established thing. And, it seemed so common that it would be a fun topic to use, because I feel like more people could learn about it, actually being a thing and what the actual purpose of it is, and so that's why I chose that and where I learned it.
Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead.
Okay. Do we have any additional questions, or do we have some comments from our professors to help our students kind of think about some other additional things that they could have done with their presentations, some other deeper thoughts, or Dr. Guitar? I know rhetoric has kind of been the thing that you've have been focused on. So do you have anything that our students could be thinking about as they polish up their presentations?
Yeah, I was actually wanting to jump in here, Andrea, and I was like, no, you're talking too much, Josh, hold back. But yeah, so first, I just love, as a rhetorician, that we're now recruiting engineers, because I think that's great. There's not enough of us technocrats.
We struggle.
I guess I picked on Anya a little bit, so I talked to Garon, and I would just say that any chance, if you are going to do something like this in the future in terms of academic research, I mean, really, you've got a great springboard for a fantastic project with the field of rhetoric. Nuance matters, right? And rhetorical situations matter. So unpacking everything that you can possibly find to explain how that rhetor is using or not using persuasive appeals to achieve some level of efficacy. You've got, I mean, Burke is obviously a fantastic linchpin to use here. I guess I'm making a recommendation if you take something like this further, and maybe you cover this in your paper, and that's just unpack as much nuance as possible. I mean, as much detail as you possibly can, because that is what really makes a rhetorician have some value in this kind of conversation. And again, perhaps you do that in the paper, but I did like the snippets that I saw.
Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Hall, I was going to ask you if you had some suggestions for our students on their presentations going forward.
Okay, sorry. Well, first of all, hello. This is me without a mask, so I was actually one of the judges. So I got to see these in person, I guess, last spring. So both of you, great job. And I definitely think you guys are on the right track as far as your presentation skills. And this isn't necessarily a piece of advice, but judging and watching you guys and seeing how you were thinking about it actually inspired me to create a classroom project that we're looking at C-SPAN video. So I'm excited to expose students to that. And great job. And I totally blanked out, but anyways, it was really great to see you guys again.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I want to thank our two URC winners, Anya and Garon, for joining us today and for sharing their research with us.